HCA Healthcare is currently in the running for one of my favorite value stocks right now. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is it actually is a value stock, meaning it is below the S&P 500 and below it pretty substantially. There's, of course, many definitions of value stock, but that's the main one I use is if your value, you're generally below the S&P 500, you're generally cheaper. We can see that performance, though. Last 5 years, 120%. Your dividend isn't nothing either. You're outperforming the S&P 500 over the last 5 years. That is good. Value stocks, we maybe don't necessarily expect them to do that. However, if we zoom out, it even looks more and more impressive. Going back to early 2015, about a decade ago, we can see this stock was at 75. We are at 322 now. The S&P 500 in that time frame is up about 200%. So clearly, we are outperforming and outperforming substantially. And then going back to 2011, you're also up incredible amounts from that. So this is a company that A, is cheap, very cheap compared to the S&P 500. B, is growing. C, is growing in share price. And is honestly, if you don't own a lot of healthcare stocks, is also good diversification outside of tech. So those are just some of the reasons I really like HCA Healthcare as a value stock, as an investment. We're going to dive into all those things in greater detail in this video. Of course, to invest in a company, we have to actually understand what that company does, what service it provides, what it produces. For HCA, it's pretty simple. I don't have to try to describe some tech thing to make a broader audience understand. HCA Healthcare does healthcare. They provide health services, hospitals, things like that. You can read all about it in this if you want to, but really that just gives you a baseline understanding. What hospitals do, generally, they do that as well. That's just what they do. So there's things that go along with that. Mainly when we're talking about a stock that has that, we have a ceiling. It's just a reality. We have a ceiling, meaning that a tech company, when you buy a tech company, you don't expect it to do an NVIDIA, right? I guess that's a term now, do an NVIDIA. You don't expect it, but you kind of hope maybe it does that, right? Oh, I like AMD, and hopefully it does that. Oh, I like this stock, a Broadcom, right? Oh, a Broadcom kind of did an NVIDIA. That's impressive. You're going to have a ceiling with a sort of healthcare stock, but inversely, healthcare is a growing field. It's going to be a growing field. What do you mean by that? Well, people are getting older. The United States are getting older. There's going to be more old people. There's going to be a larger percentage of old people. We've had that trend for 100 years in America and across the globe, and we're going to continue to see that. So, yes, you do not have that crazy high ceiling, but also you're in an industry that's not going away. Healthcare and its many components, many branches, is just going to continue to grow and grow and grow. Not just because old people, but of course people don't like growing old and dying, so people are going to try and pour money into not doing that. So there's always, not always, but usually a negative and a positive, and you can see both sides of the coin with HCA. Compared to the S&P 500, we can see clearly that we are very cheap. Our PE is just under 15, forward PE is just under 13. So compared to the S&P 500, which is at 30 and then 23 for PE and forward PE, we can clearly see we are very cheap. That is good. You're almost paying half the cost virtually. If you're going off of PE, you are. So this is clearly a company that is cheap, and that's kind of why I like it, right? One of my favorites, at least right now. It's got a good, you have that performance. 5 year, you're outperforming the S&P 500 and your half is cheap. Of course, you don't have that high end upside that you get with a healthcare stock. You don't have that tech stock where you can go up X amount, but the S&P 500 isn't going to go up 300% either. And if it is, it's a bubble. Just reality. So compared to a tech stock, you can understand why a tech stock would have a higher PE, but just the S&P 500 as a whole, I guess you don't really get that advantage. Looking at non-JAP versus JP, we can see this year we are right on the mark, so we don't have anything thrown off PE. That tells us that's fairly accurate. And then look at the growth. 10.5%, 18% next year. We're projecting 13% growth on earnings per share. That is very, very good. Over the long term, we would expect the S&P 500 to perform somewhere in that, let's say 9 on the low end, 12 on the high end. So as long as we're growing as a company around that metric, that's really good. Even an extra when it's a company that's not tech, and we can, hedge ourselves a little bit with a cheaper company. So when we get a company that is cheap at these PE metrics and growing at these rates, that's really pretty incredible. Really is something to note. Now, of course, there's other companies you can find that do this, but usually you don't get a mix of everything like this. It's pretty impressive. Revenue is slightly less impressive, 8%, 8.7, but you clearly have room and you're increasing your margins. You are. You're either focusing on areas that help you grow, whatever it may be. I don't know exactly what it is with HCA, but clearly this company is able to find either be more efficient, focus on the areas that they're making more money. But this is very impressive. Like I said, the biggest downside you're getting with HCA basically is your high-end home run scenario really isn't all that high, at least compared to some tech stocks that we see. But it's still very, very impressive what they've been able to do. And we don't get a whole lot of dividend upside, but it's still the financial side of things, the PE, where we're sitting right now, this kind of is screaming cheap to me. Taking a look at the balance sheet, the first thing that sticks out to me, I always like to look at debt. We can see they do have quite substantial debt. $43 billion is nothing to scoff at. That isn't nothing. However, generally this industry has debt ratios right around here. This is pretty normal, right? We're only bringing in $10.5 billion this year in profit, operating income. It's pretty normal. It really is if you look across the board. Now, if that's not what you're looking for, this industry has too much debt, whatever it may be, you don't want that risk because of interest rates, yada yada. That is your prerogative. That's totally fine. But I'm telling you, in this specific industry, this isn't like an outlier company where they have crazy amounts of debt, whatever it may be. That it's still a risk. I'm not saying it's not a risk. You can find many companies that have much lower debt than how much income they're bringing in, even close to no debt. I know Meta had no debt for a number of years. They do have some now, but it's really pretty unsubstantial. I guess that's the word I'm looking for. Now we can see income growth. You're going from just under 7 to 10.5. Maybe that isn't eye-popping to you either, but keep in mind that for a company that we're getting at half the price of the S&P 500, it's really, and an okay dividend on top of that, that really is not bad growth. It really isn't. Yeah, you're not doubling in 5 years. Most companies, well, you did in terms of stock price, but that really isn't bad, specifically when we see revenue hasn't increased crazy dramatically either. We're seeing that earnings per share increase. You're increasing your profit margin more than your revenue is what I'm trying to say. Or you're increasing your earnings per share more than your revenue, so therefore you're increasing your profit margin pretty substantially. And if we're doing $7.5 billion in revenue, increasing that profit margin is key and is very important. But I'm really not seeing anything that sticks out too much to me. We're going to take a little bit of a look at some PE, some historical earnings per share, whatever it may be. Now, I often say in my videos, it's important to look deeper into a stock beyond just what you see on the surface. You got to look deeper. You got to dig deeper because sometimes you can miss things. 95% of the time, it's going to look pretty similar to what you saw. But there's some times where you're just missing stuff and the market is just missing things, right? So looking at HCA, even here, we were looking at this. This is pretty good indicator for how much the company's growing, right? $7 billion in 2020, $10.5 billion in 2024. Decent increase in earnings per share, but nothing substantial, in income. Well, usually I like to look at this for historical PE, and we're going to do that. But what really jumps out is the earnings per share growth. I mean, in early 2015, a decade ago, that seems like a super long time frame, but it really isn't that long. 10 years ago, it's really not that long when you're looking at a stock. And we can see early 2015, earnings per share was about 5, just under 5. Now we're over 22, right around 22. That is a crazy increase for two reasons. One, non-tech company, value stock, value-added value stock. Well, that's the two reasons, right? You're non-tech and you're valued like a value stock. And you've, 4x'd earnings per share, over 4x'd earnings per share in a 10-year time frame. Very, 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 very impressive stuff. And you don't see that here. This doesn't look like, we're increasing earnings per share 4x in a decade. That's not what that looks like. Another thing, look at this PE ratio. Look at it historically. So this is an outlier over here in 2012 when it was just becoming public. They had higher than expected earnings per share, probably something non-GAP or GAP throwing it off. And we can see here, we basically bounce between 10, 9.5, maybe at the very, very bottom 8. And then somewhere in that, 15, 18 range? What are we, 17.5? So we're right in our baseline, right? Our PE right now is what? We're at 14. And we bounce between 18 and then 8. Right in that middle. We aren't historically high. So, like I said, not financial investing advice. However, what we're looking at here is a company that's A, growing very fast, growing earnings per share very fast. B, valued right where it normally is, and C, has outperformed the S&P 500 in terms of share price, not just with earnings per share growth. That's what you're looking for, guys. This is the sort of thing it's hard to find, but when you find it, it's just like, oh dang, there's something here. Of course, every company has unique risks and advantages. It's important to lay them out, discuss them, and understand them so you know what you're getting into with the specific stock you're investing in. So with HCA, if I'm being completely honest, it's kind of hard for them. With some tech stocks, it's easy. Oh, this tech stock gets 80% of their profit from AI innovation. So if AI investing slows down, they lose a lot of money. That's pretty easy risk, right? HCA, it's a lot harder because they don't do anything super niche. I mean, they're in a niche industry, but there's a lot of other companies around them, and a lot of the things that would hurt them is going to hurt a lot of companies as well. I mean, so like rising labor costs, things like that. You could see, oh yeah, that's a risk. But broadly, like, there's not a whole lot that you would say, oh yeah, that's obviously going to hurt, right? We have that aging population, more investment into healthcare, always. So that's not a bad thing. And you could say a lot of the things like, oh, that hurts all the other companies as well. And that necessarily doesn't hurt you unless you're not advantaged properly. What I mean by that is if you have like rising labor costs, specifically in the medical space, you're going to price out a lot of other competition that's maybe below you, assuming you can hunker down, survive, whatever it may be. It might actually help you in the long run. Kind of like Tesla not liking EV tax credits because it helps a lot of other companies that sell EVs survive, while even though it hurt them in the short term, long term it helped them. So I'm not even sure that's a major risk. I mean, you could say like widespread revamping of the medical industry could hurt them dramatically, although who knows if that would ever really happen. That's more of a political thing. I don't really want to weigh the odds on that, but you could say that is a risk. It's a small risk. It's not super likely of happening, but if it does, you could see some worry. You could see some actual hurt there, and it could lead to more and more labor shortages in the long term. But honestly, not a whole lot of just existential risk, and it's kind of hard to find super niche ones to pin it down on. If you guys have any good ones, I'd like to hear them down in the comment section so I could walk through that. Maybe I know about it, maybe I even don't. But advantages, like I said, growing field, it's going to continue to grow. You do have that cap I talked about earlier in the video. You're never really going to be able to go. You're never going to be able to do an NVIDIA. It's just not possible. You don't expect any companies to do it with your tech ones. You kind of hope in the back of your head maybe it does it. You're not going to really get that with HCA, even if the stars align. But generally, good company, growing well, in a good field. Schwab backs that. They think it's going to be top 16% of stocks performing. I believe it's a one-year outlook. They said that about a week ago. So I sort of agree. If you can't tell, I kind of like this stock. It's one of the value stocks I'm pretty high on, because I think there's a lot of things going their way that I've discussed in this video, right? So I am not the biggest stock price projection guy. Many of you who have watched my channel before know this. I don't like saying, oh, this stock will be X by Y. I just don't. Not my thing. I think there's too many factors in the market. However, I do think it's important to give some sort of projection how I think it's going to perform, so you just know what I'm thinking. Of course, I do not have a crystal ball. I cannot see the future. I do think broadly HCA is going to perform right in line with the S&P 500. I do. I think over the last 10 years they've done so. Since they've IPO'd, they've certainly done so. Recently they've done so. I don't see why they can't continue to do that. But I also think if you're going to gain anything, if you can outperform the S&P 500, you're going to see that mostly in PE increasing. You may see it be a little bit closer to 20 than to 10 going forward. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. Certainly if the S&P 500 PE was to decrease, right, you wouldn't be closer to 20, but you could get closer to that S&P 500 PE level as well. Maybe the S&P 500 PE drops to 20 and you stay around 15, right? If you're growing in line with the S&P 500, that probably means you're outperforming it in terms of share price. So I do think this company is also great diversification. Probably many of you watching this video really, really like value stocks, really like healthcare stocks. You kind of know it, you get it, you invest in that industry. Me, I'm a tech guy. I cover a lot of tech, I invest in a lot of tech. So for me, HCA is good diversification as well. I think even if it underperforms the S&P 500 long term, slightly, 5 years, when the S&P 500 goes up 100%, it goes up 90%, something like that. Of course, that's just a metric I'm using. I would be okay with that, mainly because I would expect my tech stocks to outperform the S&P 500. So if HCA is a value stock I'm using, performing pretty well, close to the S&P 500, I'm probably overall doing very well. So That's kind of how I look at things. However, every one of your situations is uniquely different, whatever it may be. I think HCA is going to continue to do well. Of course, can't see the future, and even either way, the risk you're taking at that PE ratio with the historical performance of this stock, I think you're good. I think it's a good bet. I think it's a good investment to make. So anyways, I appreciate all of you for watching this video. If you enjoyed, like and subscribe. I do daily stock content on this channel, and I appreciate all of you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.